Hey everyone, I'm Ian, and I think it's about time I make my bold leap into 3D. It's harder than it looks, okay?
3D Sonic, a combination of words likely to cause civil war in some corners of the internet. Sonic may have gotten his start as a 2D platformer, but from the very earliest days of the series, it was clear that Sega had three-dimensional ambitions for their speedy blue rat boy. The sense of depth portrayed in level backgrounds all the way back in Sonic 1 remains impressive, and let's not forget the obvious, the special stages. Sonic 2, Sonic 3, Sonic CD, even Knuckles Chaotix all tried their hands at a pseudo-3D gameplay style as a bonus on top of the main 2D adventure.
I hooked up a 32X to a Genesis to get that footage. It took me all day. You're welcome.
Point is, it's very clear that Sega wanted to stick the blue blur in the third dimension from the earliest days of the series, and frankly, it didn't exactly take them long, with the first fully fledged 3D installment, Sonic Adventure, releasing in Japan in 1998, just 7 years after Sonic first appeared. But of course, there were a lot of different transitional games before that, be it racing games, fighting games, glorified menus that are far cooler than they have any right to be. Sonic had been kicking around in 3D for quite a while before SA1 made it the standard.
And in terms of transitional 3D Sonic games, none is more well-known or more ambivalently regarded than Traveler's Tales Sonic 3D Blast, or Sonic 3D Flicky's Island, if you're the kind of person who calls your Genesis a Mega Drive and, oh thanks Sega of Europe, I didn't even want to sleep tonight.
Popping the game into the Genesis, we start off with the fully pre-rendered cutscene. Holy shit! It's extremely short and compressed to hell and back, yes, but still, FMV on the Genesis. That's wild. The actual plot is presented in a much less impressive slideshow format, but it still looks great for the hardware. Sonic is visiting the mysterious Flicky's Island, home to a variety of differently colored birds. Of course, Eggman's there, and of course, he put the birds into robots, because Eggman. Yeah, okay, so the story isn't particularly special, but again, the intro slideshow cutscene thing is really nice, and by Genesis Sonic standards, the plot is fine. Like, it matches up perfectly okay against the likes of Sonic 1 or 2 or whatever, so it gets the job done. After that, the first stage starts, and yeah, that's 3D on the Genesis, alright. Well, it's pretending to be 3D at least. The entire game is played from this isometric perspective, allowing free movement in a pseudo-3D space. And you play it all with a D-pad. Great.
I'd say the best word to describe Sonic 3D Blast's control is sloppy.
Like, you'll get from point A to point B on the ground just fine, but Sonic's pretty slippery on his feet, and despite not being as quick as in the 2D games, he's still not exactly slow either. Add the imprecision of D-pad-based movement in a 3D space on top of that, and doing any kind of accurate, precise platforming becomes extremely frustrating. Sonic really feels like he's got butter on his feet, and although it's something that I never quite got used to be fair, I guess it's never particularly detrimental either, thanks to the level design. See, while progression is more or less the same as other Sonic games of the time with 2 acts and a boss per zone, the levels themselves aren't the linear, fast-paced stages you might expect. No, this game is actually more like a small-scale collectathon with open levels, decades before Sonic Frontiers would revisit the concept later. Remember how I mentioned Eggman capturing Flickies in the game's story? Well, the whole game revolves around rescuing them, taking the idea of Sonic bursting animals out of the robots he defeats and turning that into the central focus of the gameplay. On one hand, I actually think that's a really cool idea, not only because it expands upon an iconic detail that never really affected anything before, but also because, well, it's a really cute callback to Flicky, a 1984 Sega arcade game where you play as a mama bird named Flicky and rescue her babies. Collecting all the birds and leading them to the goal was the entire game, and that's very accurately recreated here in 3D Blast, right down to the way that they follow you around and even the sound effects they make. I adore the callback, honestly.
On the other hand, actually playing it is boring as shit.
Yeah, since you have to save all the Flickies to progress, that means you have to kill every enemy to progress, and they're all spaced out over these large open areas. Each level is broken up into a few chunks that you explore to find all the enemies before moving on to the next chunk to find all the enemies, and you basically spend all the time exploring chunks finding enemies. And all that time you are wandering around wide flat ground doing nothing to interact with the environment. There's very little in the way of actual platforming here, which given the controls is a good thing, and when it does show up, you can usually just spin dash over it, and honestly, as annoying as it is, it's so infrequent that I'd call it unintrusive overall, but on the other hand, that means the level design is so dull. Generally, you're just walking around large flat areas trying to kill all the enemies, as well as seeing what other collectibles you may find along the way. The classic Sonic staples are all here, like rings, speed shoes that make things control so much worse, invincibility, and of course shield, this time coming in 3 varieties. The standard shield is about what you'd expect. The fire shield protects you from fire and makes the lava levels a total joke, and the golden shield gives you the homing attack, making its first appearance here, and it actually feels really good to use. It's easily the most reliable way to dispatch enemies, and jumping on them is really hard with its camera angle, and rolling into them works, but it's so much less stimulating. The gold shield really does make things a lot more enjoyable. I usually lose it within literal seconds.
There's also these little Sonic head tokens that look like lives but are actually for earn and continues. I forgot about them. I added this to the script mid-recording.
No, it sucks? Getting hit when you have all the flickies. See, you collect them and then drop them at these giant rings to progress, but if you take damage, then they scatter like your rings do, and depending on the color of some of these little shits, they actively avoid you. Why? I'm trying to rescue you! Stay still! The game's camera angle makes it pretty easy to be blindsided, so this is usually a problem at least once per level, and just stay fucking still! Oh, forget it. Honestly, Eggman could just have these fucking things. Oh yeah, let's talk about Eggman. These boss fights are kind of annoying. The actual bosses are pretty standard fare and remind me a lot of the battles on like Sonic 1, but like they're really boring and easy since the third dimension gives you a lot of room to just like meander away from his attacks. On the flip side though, actually hitting him is pretty precise and that leads to some definite irritation. Not because you'll die, the fights are still really easy, just because you'll bonk off the side of his machine more than you'll actually find his hitbox. I don't love it. The final boss is really cool at least. You cycle between these different phases basically on the fly, so you always have to be a little on your toes and like, look at the floor. It's cool. The final boss is actually locked behind the Chaos Emerald Sonic 3 style. No Supersonic though, which is a bummer, but honestly you may as well go for the emeralds anyway because this has to be the easiest they've ever made it. Entering the special stages is done by grabbing 50 rings and finding either Knuckles or Tails. They're usually hidden like just off the beaten path, so the challenge lies in just grabbing the 50 rings rather than finding them. Some levels have both of them, sometimes literally next to each other, and allow you to enter 2 special stages in one level, which really expedites the process of collecting these things, especially since they are absolutely hidden in the easiest special stages in the series. You just run on a bridge, and you get the rings, and honestly, has anyone ever lost one of these? You can literally just stay in the middle, hit jump occasionally, and you'll clear all of these no problem. Also, I'm sorry, but I always thought Tails and Knuckles were just so ugly in this game.
The game's visuals in general are one of the more often criticized aspects of the game, and yeah, I get it, it's definitely aged.
For context, by the time 3D Blast was released in '96, Donkey Kong Country for the Super NES had already taken the world by storm with its incredibly impressive pre-rendered sprite work, and it's clear that Sega wanted to get in on that action for Sonic's 16-bit swansong. The result? Blocky colors and dithering. Lots of it.
To be fair though, we're not exactly looking at the game as originally intended.
I currently record all retro game footage through a device called the RetroTink 5X, which scales retro systems up to HD to work with my capture card. This, plus high-end RGB cables, gives me some of the best possible video quality out of original Genesis hardware.
Back in the day though, people typically weren't using RGB cables to hook their consoles up. They were probably using composite video cables like this.
When scaled up for modern displays, composite video is blurry and smeared and generally not very pleasant to look at. However, some clever developers were able to use this to their advantage to achieve visual effects that the hardware wasn't natively capable of. Take these waterfalls in Sonic 2. They're a bunch of solid lines, right? Well, with composite videos, those lines and empty spaces in between blur to create a fake transparency effect. That looks great with super fluid colors. 3D Blast makes very generous use of this trick to elevate its illusion of 3D, and with the right cables on an appropriately old TV, it's actually a really cool look that's far more impressive than what the Genesis could really do on a technical level.
I would argue then that given the artist's intentions, 3D Blast is actually pretty impressive visually, even if my footage doesn't necessarily reflect that.
That said, the fact that every level has a similar checkerboard floor pattern is definitely not great for level variety. It does, however, end up being essential to the game's playability, since the differently angled squares on the floor do a great job demonstrating level geometry and making depth perception that much less of a hassle. And that isn't to say that there's no variety among the 7 alliteratively named zones. Diamond Dust Zone really nails the Winter Wonderland vibe, and the second act of Panic Puppet Zone is super neat, climbing up a giant Eggman robot. I love this. Also, it's the only stage where you don't have to rescue flickies, and what do you know? It's the best level in the game. Who would have guessed? As far as the rest of the presentation goes, well, it's a Genesis Sonic game, and that means a stellar soundtrack. And I gotta tell ya, 3D Blast has one of the best. It carries on the tradition from Sonic 3 of having every level have a different version of the level's theme, and man, these tracks all absolutely nail it. Catchy, atmospheric, blood pumping. It's no wonder so much of this game's soundtrack was reused and remixed in Sonic Adventure a few years later. It is legitimately one of the best soundtracks in the series. It's definitely the best part of the game, which I know isn't saying a ton, but hey, I'd be lying if I say the music didn't make things way more tolerable for me.
So that's Sonic 3D Blast for the Sega Genesis. It's not great, but yeah, no, that's it. It's just not great. There is a lot I find very impressive about it though, so hey, maybe give it a try. You might just enjoy yourself.
We're not quite done yet though. 3D Blast was meant to be the swan song to Sonic's adventures on the Genesis, while his next real installment, Sonic Extreme, would wow players on Sega's flagship console, the Saturn. Then Sonic Extreme fucking died.
I could do a whole video on Sonic Extreme, and to be honest, I probably will at some point, but To make up for the loss of such a major holiday flagship release, Sega and Traveler's Tales rushed out an enhanced port of Sonic 3D Blast for the Saturn, released on the same day as the Genesis version in November of '96. And you know what? It's actually pretty cool.
This almost feels like a modern-day remaster, taking a game from the previous console gen and just sprucing it up to shelf what the newer hardware is capable of. And in terms of upgrades, we get quite a lot here, with the manual even boasting support for the Saturn 3D pad. It lied, but okay, no. I mean, it works, but it doesn't support the analog stick. That means Sonic is unfortunately still just as awkward to maneuver, and the levels are unfortunately still just as boring to navigate as ever. But at least it looks a whole lot better. The checkerboard floor patterns remain, which I'd argue is a good thing, since they're the only real indicator of depth that this game has, but now they're all distinctly different textures and different stages, and there are even weather effects to make every area just that bit more atmospheric, and I gotta say, it's actually really effective. They also changed the soundtrack, not only using CD quality music, but entirely different compositions, and yeah, it's alright. I like the original Genesis soundtrack a great deal more, but Richard Jacques, known to fans for doing the Sonic R soundtrack, and for flipping out about T-Loops on Twitter that one time, does a pretty great job here, and provides what is ultimately a very good soundtrack in its own right. Think the US versus Japanese Sonic CD soundtracks. It's definitely just down to personal preference.
The biggest change comes in the way that the special stages are handled.
On the surface, it seems basically the same as ever, right? Get 50 rings and visit Tails or Knuckles. However, unlike in the Genesis version, you can only get 1 emerald per stage, even if you visit both characters. That's pretty inconvenient, but it is made up for with what I am absolutely confident in calling the best special stage in the entire Sonic series, at least maybe up until Mania came out. Seriously, these are so good. They're yet another take on the Sonic 2 half-pipe, which on paper I'm not a particularly big fan of, but the execution here is just phenomenal. Being fully 3D and running at a smooth frame rate allows for a much easier time grabbing rings and avoiding bombs, especially since it also controls pretty close to perfectly, and that difficulty is just right. You can absolutely afford to make a few mistakes, but that doesn't stop these from feeling challenging. And these gimmicks are so cool. There are springs, 360-degree tunnels, slopes that affect your speed, even minor platforming elements pop up. These are legitimately incredible and are probably the best showing of Sonic in 3D before Adventure. Except maybe Jam? Jam was cool. Anyway, special stages aside, this is still Sonic 3D Blast, and while the 15 minutes or so spent in the special stages are some of the coolest 15 minutes in any classic Sonic game, it's still ultimately the same game as on the Genesis with all the same problems. I would say I like this version more, if only for the special stages, which really do deserve attention, but being my favorite version of a mediocre game still isn't exactly the highest of praise, you know?
Now around this time, Sega was also making waves with their PC ports, and oh, hang on one second, I'm getting a call. Hello? Oh no.
Sonic 3D Blast by Tiger Electronics. Oh boy. Tiger made a few different Sonic ports in their infamous lineup of handheld LCD games, and yeah, this is certainly one of them. I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, I have no idea how to play this. I guess you're maneuvering Sonic through a sort of 3D maze, which is fitting, I guess, but I don't really understand how you're supposed to perceive the action here. It's pretty ambitious for what it is, but as a result, I found it almost completely impossible to follow. Eventually, I just got tired of the beeping and gave up. Moving on.
In the late 90s, Sega had a habit of porting their console games to PC, and Sonic 3D Blast was no exception, arriving on Windows about a year after the console versions came out. It was fine.
This is basically just a straight port of the Saturn version with the same visual enhancements and altered soundtrack. Running off my SSD means the load times aren't annoying like they could be in the Saturn version at times, but on the other hand, the fully 3D special stages that were easily the best part of that version are not present here. Replaced instead with this one. It's pretty much a Frankenstein stage, basically an attempt to replicate the 3D half-pipe of the Saturn game using the 2D assets of the Genesis version, and it's a fine special stage, I guess? It's ugly, but hey, at least it's easy and painless, possibly even more so than the Genesis version if you can believe it. Otherwise, yeah, the PC version is fine, though it's probably the least impressive version to me. Okay, fine, second least impressive.
And yeah, that's it as far as Sonic 3D Blast goes. I mean, it has been ported a bunch of times since, but it's always just emulations of the Genesis version, which, to be honest, I think is kind of a shame, since the Saturn version overall is the best one in my opinion.
Not that it really matters, though I definitely wouldn't call it an awful game. I also can't say that I'd really describe 3D Blast as all that worth playing. Don't get me wrong, I remain legitimately impressed by the presentation, and I think the core concept being a spiritual remake and adaptation of the original Flicky arcade game is insanely cool and honestly really inspiring, given that character's role in the Sonic games of the time. I just also don't think it's fun to play, with the slippery controls and just plain boring level design and structure holding it back. I do think the Saturn version special stages may well be the best in the franchise, certainly the best half-pipes, but I just don't think they make it worth the trouble.
Still, 3D Blast does have its fans, so I say it's still worth checking out just to see if it's your cup of tea. And hey, if you do decide to check it out, maybe try the director's cut.
It's a ROM hack developed by John Burton, the game's original programmer, and it does a lot to address the major issues the game has, like making Sonic control way faster and snappier, and, most notably in my opinion, making it so that flickies are now lost one at a time instead of all at once when you take damage. Not to mention adding a ton of other quality of life improvements like a world map, password saves, even Super Sonic once you collect all the emeralds. Not that I played it long enough to unlock him though, because at its core this is still 3D Blast, and ultimately I do still think the game is pretty tedious to sit through, but hey, this is still pretty damn neat.
But anyway, what do you think of Sonic 3D Blast? What's your favorite version of it? Are you a huge fan of the Tiger Electronics version? Maybe? Let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe to see more from me. Until next time guys, I'm LyingTuna, signing off, bye.